Hi everyone, it's Amy here from the blog I Think Therefore I Teach. Welcome to your next Criminology instalment. This is for Unit 4 and it's 1.2. Now, I find this topic quite dry, mainly because it's things that you've already covered in Unit 3, so quite a lot of it is fairly repetitive. However, it is now a must learn, a must remember, a must revise for that Unit 4 exam. So let me make myself smaller and we'll get cracking. All right, 1.2 then. And this topic is describe the organisation of the criminal justice system in England and Wales. So this is describing the organisation of it. In this topic, you'll need to be able to describe the organisation of the criminal justice system in England and Wales. And it's these five areas you need to know. You need to know how laws are created, the police and the role of the police, the courts and the role of the courts, the formal punishments that are given, and then the relationships between all of these different organisations. That's what makes this topic quite tricky, I find. You should have knowledge of the organisation and role of the agencies involved in criminal justice. You should also consider the relationships between different agencies and the extent of cooperation that exists. And you need to be aware of synoptic links. So Unit 1, the role of the police and lawmaking in your campaigns to change the law. And then Unit 3, the interrelated roles of various personnel in the criminal investigations, crime scene, courtroom and beyond. So you've done all the bail processes, you've already done about the magistrates, you've done about the Crown Courts, etc. So all of that comes in here. So what I got my students to do was I gave them all the different organisations and what they do as far as law creation and the process that they are part of, and I got them to put them in the right order. The order is as follows. So this is the order of where everybody comes in. This is the criminal justice procedure. And so the ones in yellow are the people, not the yellow, the colours, sorry, the ones in colour are the people, they are the organisations or the agencies, and the order of which things happen. So laws are created in Parliament or by the judiciary. The new law, so if there's no precedent already set, then the judge will make a new one. The new law is then enforced by the police. So we often only see it from the second point, that we know there's a law and if we break it, we're going to have problems with the police. But these laws have to be created in the first place. The Crown Prosecution or the CPS decides if there is a case to bring to court and advises the police. So don't forget the Crown Prosecution Service was brought in because the police used to make those decisions, and a lot of them went to court that were then dismissed because there wasn't good enough evidence, etc. So this cost the taxpayers a lot of money. The Crown Prosecution Service were then designed as a separate organisation to completely look at those cases to work out what is the likelihood of these with the full code test, etc., to work out will these cases get through the jury or the court process for a conviction that is successful. Is it worth the taxpayers' money? Cases are brought before the magistrates court first. The magistrates, there's normally 3 magistrates. These, again, if you remember, are people that are not paid for their role. They're not specifically necessarily legally trained, etc. And again, we looked at the strengths and weaknesses of the magistrates in Unit 3. The accused is then released on bail or remanded in custody. So if they're released on bail, if they have they'll probably have quite strict bail controls or constraints on that, or they're remanded in custody if they believe that person is at risk, a flight risk of not following the bail restrictions, not coming for their hearing, or if they are unsafe when they're outside of that environment. So if they go back into society, are they then unsafe from other people as well? They may plead guilty and be sentenced, or not guilty and be sent to trial. This is heard by the magistrates or a jury. If found guilty, the magistrate or judge will give formal punishment, guidance given by the sentencing council. Defendant may be sent to prison. Prison and welfare of prisoners is overseen by the HM Prison Service, Her Majesty's Prison Service. The HM Inspectorate of Prisons is a separate authority that ensures that conditions and treatment of prisoners meet standards. And then finally, after prison, a person is supervised by a probation service. So this is the process that we go through, and most of that is fairly similar and familiar to you. I then get my students to go back to the cut and stick activity that they've done, and I get them now to add in 3 details about each of them, just like I've said a few details about them. 3 details about the jury, 3 details about the magistrates, 3 details about the HM prison service. It can be absolutely anything, just 3 bits of information about them. I also then got them to draw a picture. Now that might seem a really bizarre thing to do, but pictures really help your memory. So Crown Prosecution Service, how can you remember them? The police, how can you remember them? A lot of my students drew police cars, for example, or judge, they drew like a gavel. Prison, they drew the prison bars. This connects to the different part of your brain that helps you to remember them, because you have to remember what's in front of you right here. That's really hard. That's really hard. I mean, it's straightforward enough. There's no evaluations or analysis, but you just have to remember them. So using pictures might help you remember that order as well as just going over it. So I then, on the back of that cut and stick sheet, I got them to do a bubble of these different organisations, and I got them to do them in different colours. This helps when we come to the relationships, which is on the next couple of slides. So around the bubble, I got them to first of all do a law creation link. With the law creation, this is Parliament and judges. They make the laws which deal with crime. Parliament passes acts. The judges create law through precedents and statutory interpretation. So they interpret the statutes that are already there. They might deal with previous precedents that have already been set or have to make their own. Administration of the criminal justice system by the Ministry of Justice and the Home Office. So that would be their first bubble link with law creation and all the things that come from that. We then move on to our next colour, which is the police. The police enforce the law. They are the law enforcers. They investigate crimes, they collect evidence from crime scenes, they arrest, they detain and they question suspects. And we know things like PACE is now put in place, so it's always good to mention examples, case studies or legal documents, legal acts. So it's good to mention things like this, so we know PACE is in place in order for the detaining and the questioning to be done in a proper manner. They may issue cautions or fixed penalty notices in minor cases. So that's going back to Unit 2 from the first year of when you might get a caution, when you might get a penalty notice, what then penalty notice might include. So that's things like a caution might be for the first time that you've been caught vandalising. You'll get a caution, you might have a penalty notice in that you have to clean it up and pay a fine, but they won't take it to court, for example. However, if you are a repeat offender, then it might become more serious. They also send files to the CPS in most cases. So most cases that they can't deal with, so the most minor cases they can deal with, but anything else, 90% of them goes to the CPS for them to deal with. The CPS then, different colour. They advise the police in their investigations about lines of inquiry and what evidence is required. There's a 24-hour helpline between the police and the CPS. So these really are the people that they can ask their questions to. They help with inquiry, they help with, if this case is to go through to court, to a jury, to a judge, a magistrate's court, what evidence do they need to find and have for it to be successful? They assess the evidence submitted by the police and decide whether to prosecute. Is the evidence good enough? And what the charges should be. They apply the full code test, as we've already said. And they prepare and present the prosecution case in court. So the CPS have a really important role. In your fourth colour around the bubble, this is for the HM courts and the tribunal service. We know that suspects are brought before the magistrates court. 95% of all cases, these are the less serious ones, the less serious crimes. If it's a serious crime, it goes straight to Crown Court. The magistrates will not deal with them. Initially for the pre-trial hearing. Issues like the plea, bail and legal aid are decided. Not guilty pleas lead on to the trial. This may be in Crown Court for more serious crimes. Evidence is heard in court before a jury or a magistrate. The verdict is then decided. So jury if it goes to Crown Court, magistrates if it goes to a magistrate's court. And the sentence is then passed. You actually need 5 colours. I'll go back and change that for my class. So you actually need 5 colours. The final section of the people that you need to know are the HM Prison and Probation Service. So this would be the final part of your bubble if you're doing it in that way. The HM Prison Service supervises offenders in custody, so as they're in custody, they'll be supervised and have somebody with them. They will supervise the punishment that's given. They will also rehabilitate in order to lead to a crime-free life, so they'll help with rehabilitation. And then this also is linked in with the National Probation Service. They supervise offenders serving their sentence in the community. So some offenders might be doing community service, they might be doing other things within the community, so they'll watch them or supervise them. Including offenders released on licence to serve part of their sentence outside of prison. All prisoners who have served up to 2 years in prison and are released on licence are subject to minimum of 12 months supervision by probation. So if you've been given a sentence and you're released after 2 years, but you're released early on licence, then you have to have at least 12 months probation to make sure that you are following the law and that you are not falling into bad habits and that we know what you are doing. They also supervise punishments, and they help with rehabilitation as well. So these are your organisations. You need to know what each of them does. You need to remember what the four are. So obviously there's more 3 organisations, and then lawmaking, setting the law out. So it's not really an organisation, but it's part of an organisation of what they do. But you need to know what happens within each of these, what their roles are. We then move on to the relationships. Now, you need to know how they all work together, hence why the colours are important, and hence why the spider diagram then goes out further. So at this stage, going back to the original colours, I've kept police as number 2, so we don't have one for lawmaking because the law just has to be set and then everybody else works according to that. So we start with the police. So whatever your police is in the colour, I've done mine blue for police. On your police section, wherever it is on your bubble, you can then start linking it out further to the people it's connected with. So the police are connected with the CPS, so keep the CPS in their colour. The CPS provide evidence for the prosecution of suspects, charging suspects in line with the CPS instructions. So the police work with the CPS to share their evidence. We already know that. They work with the courts, giving evidence as prosecution witnesses, protection for vulnerable witnesses, holding defendants in prison cells and transporting to and from court. So the police have a lot of interactions with the courts. They might be called to be a witness. They might have to, if a witness is vulnerable, they might need to protect them. They might have to hold them in prison cells if they believe that there might be a flight risk to them. And they also transport to and from the courts. They also work with the HM Prison and Probation Services. They arrest prisoners who have breached their terms of licence. So if the Prison and Probation Service found that actually the person that they are supervising has broke the law, then they will ring the police, and the police are the ones that then deal with it. After Sarah's Law, police will cooperate with Prison and Probation to manage the list of child sex offenders. And then something totally separate, but they often work with voluntary organisations as well. The police will refer victims and witnesses to victim support, women's refuges, the witness service, etc. So that's just a separate colour completely, because that's just an extra thing, an extra organisation the police work with. The Crown Prosecution Service, they work with the police. There's a 24-hour helpline. They give advice on evidence and charging. They also work with the courts. They prepare and present prosecution cases. So they actually, the CPS go into courts to present the cases. They also appeal against unduly lenient sentences. So if any sentence was lenient, that's down to the CPS then to appeal it. Finally, for this slide, sorry, there's another slide yet for the HM Prison Service and Probation links. The HM courts link to the police and other security firms, safe delivery of suspects and of suspects prisoners to court. So again, you can see the links. The links go across. If the police help with them, they help with them. So some of these are repeated, and so you only need to learn them once. The spider diagram might not work for your brain. You might want to do more of a flow chart, something like that. But basically, you need to know who they are, what they do, who they link with, what their relationships are. The police also may be witnesses. They obviously within the courts they also have other people within the court systems, so they fund courts and supervise the efficient running of the court systems as well. HM Prison Service, in holding prisoners in court cells pending their hearing and return to prison. And also HM Prison Service arrange video links for people giving evidence from prison. So there's lots of links between different organisations. And it sounds very complicated and very confusing when you're outside of it like we are. When you're on the inside and you're part of this process, you'll know exactly who you ring for what. Finally, the relationships then for the HM Prison and the Probation Service. These are both the same agency, or they work under the same heading, but they link, the prison links in with some people, the Probation Service links with others. So I separated it to make it even clearer. Prison Service works with the courts, putting sentences into practice and supervising defendants remanded in custody, who are the ones who have refused bail, being refused bail. Supervising visits from defence lawyers. They also work with the police, facilitating interviews as part of ongoing investigations. They also work with, of course, the Probation Service, which is part of their organisation, their agency, liaising when a prisoner is to be released on licence and what they are going to do. So how we're going to get them from prison onto the Probation Service. The Probation Service work with the police, so if somebody again is remanded off their licence, recalled to prison while on probation. The Prison Service, so probation works with the Prison Service, as we've already said, supervising them on their licence. They work with the courts in preparing pre-sentencing reports on offenders, supervising offenders given a community service, and supervising drug testing as well. So the probation works with the courts in those ways. So hopefully the colour systems has helped you to see how they interact together, but it's an extremely complicated kind of spider diagram of interweaved webs of how they help each other. But even if you can just work it down to a couple of relationships between each of them, that would be fantastic. So you need to know who they are, what they do, who they have a relationship with. That's what you need to know for this topic. I then gave my students a quick quiz. Give one way in which the police might work with the court system, which organisation decides on whether a case should be taken to court, which body oversees the courts and tribunals, give one organisation that might work with the prison service, which government departments oversee law creation and administration, and give one role of the National Probation Service. So give it a pause there if you want to give those questions a go. If you don't, you want to continue, here are the answers. So number one way the police might work with the court systems is they give evidence, take defendants to court. Which organisations is the CPS. Body oversees courts and tribunals is the HM Courts and Tribunals Service, so that's their name. What organisation is the courts, police or probation. Which government departments oversee law creation, of course, is the Ministry of Justice and the Home Office. And finally, one role of the probation, they supervise people on release, released on licence or given community services, community sentences, sorry. I then got my students to research two of the extra voluntary agencies, so the Prison Reform Trust, the Victim Support, the Howard League for Penal Reform, Women's Aid, Inquest or Unlock. We've done Inquest and Unlock before, but it's just again having two further examples. The more examples you give in your exam, the better. I also got them to look at MAPA, the Multiple Agency Public Protection Arrangements. I always want to call it Protection Acts, but it's an arrangement. Look up MAPA. MAPA is when a lot of these agencies get together. So if there is somebody that is about to be released from prison and they're a serious crime offender, they have a serious crime, sex acts, murder, etc., etc., all of these agencies through MAPA will get together to plan who are they a risk to, what do we have to monitor, what do we have to watch, what do we have to put in place, and so they all work together in a far more formal manner. So they all have a meeting point to discuss this offender and how to best deal with them for the public. Hence, public protection. How can we protect the public from this person? What sort of exam style questions then would you get? A 5-marker might be describe the relationship between the Crown Prosecution Service and the police. A 6 marker would be describe relationships between the police, the CPS and the courts as a case proceeds through. So what as a case proceeds through, what are the roles of the police, the CPS and the courts? Describe the relationship of the prison service with other agencies, and describe relationships between various organisations, so just a very open one for 9 marks. So some of them might be specific, some of them might be completely general, but everything you need to know is on the PowerPoint of what we've just covered. Note that the questions could name specific organisations, CPS, police, etc., or leave it open for you to select the agencies to consider. For that 9 marker, you pretty much need to talk about most of them, if not all of them, I would say. Be guided by the number of marks. So if it wasn't a 9 marker and it was a 5 marker, you would maybe only give a few examples of the agencies and the relationships. Because it's a 9 marker, you are looking for all of them. And so then I created an exam question sheet for my students where I gave them those questions. I gave boxes for them to plan. I gave them boxes for them to write out answers. I gave them sample answers, which I'm going to share with you on the next slide so that you get access to them as well. I got them to mark them, what could make them better, what was already good about them, etc., etc. So the one that I gave the students, I got them to first of all mark it and then I gave the marks. So this one's given 5 marks. I want my students to first of all mark it though, and told them it was out of 7. How many would they give it? What was the good things, the bad things? So that's the answer that was given 5 marks. The question was the relationship between the prison service with other agencies. So how does the prison service work with, so that was your green colour on this PowerPoint, how do they work with everybody else? So the prison service has a relationship with many other agencies in the CJS criminal justice system. One of these is the police, as prisons hold people who have been remanded in custody and denied bail by the police and the courts. The CPS liaise with prisons to request a prisoner's appearance in court or over video link. The judiciary are the ones that send people to prison and keep prison as a sentencing option. Probation services have a relationship as if a person fails to keep their conditions, e.g. not turning up for appointments, the person may be sent to prison to serve the remainder of their sentence. The government creates legislation regarding prisoners and often inspects them, ensuring all rights, etc. are maintained. Now, that's a long answer. It was given 5 marks. The example, I think, also helps, so giving an e.g. is always good. So the good points, several agencies mentioned and connections made, relationships made, focus on prison maintained and technical terms used. So technical terms like remanded, technical terms like custody. Just having a look for others. Bail is mentioned. So it's always good to use keywords, and obviously I had to really search for them in there, so having keywords really jump out is a good thing as well to get your marks. What could have been added? They missed 2 marks, so it's probably 2 points they've missed. The first is further details, e.g. the prisoners who have served up to 2 years and released are subject to 12 months probation. Or they could have added in that police would rearrest if they breach terms and return them to prison. Or they could have added in that the Inspectorate of Prisons does the inspecting. So basically it was just extending these points that they've already done, adding a little bit more to them, giving another example, etc. Just that bit more detail. This is quite superficial. Point, point, point. Give a little bit more detail for those top marks. The next one I got my students to do on their worksheet was describe relationships between the police, the CPS and the courts as a case proceeds through, and this was an exemplar answer. So this just gives them an idea of how does their answer look, what have they missed, can they use this to help them. So the police will investigate a potential crime and liaise with the CPS regarding charge. The police will ensure arrested suspects held in police custody are brought before the courts. They will also arrest a prisoner recalled whilst on probation and ensure their return to prison. extension. Again, you've got your keywords there like recalled, you've got your details there and your extension. The CPS will advise the police during the early stages of an investigation. They will review cases submitted by the police, prepare cases for court and present those cases in court. The prosecution will consider whether there is enough evidence and apply the full code test. Again, full code test. That's again extra bit of detail. Bit of detail there is gets you the marks. The CPS will also carry out the advocacy for hearings in either the Magistrates Court or the Crown Court. Keywords used again there. All cases will start in the Magistrates Court with summary offences staying there for the determination. Either way cases and all indictable offences, again keyword used, will proceed to the Crown Court. A lot of keywords used there. 4 bullet points, 2 of them extended points, keywords used. You've also got the proceedings through, so you're sticking to the question, you're answering the question there. And then finally for the 9 marker, describe relations with the various organisations of the criminal justice system. How would you answer this question? So again, on my student sheet, I got them to do a plan, lawmaking, acts of parliament, judiciary, overseas, the justice and the home office. So what links could they make? What could they talk about? What relationship could they mention? Law enforcement, what are the links? CPS and the courts, what are the links? Prison and probation, what are the links? And then any other voluntary organisations or MAPA. So I basically got them to plan out their answer. How would they get 9 marks? How would they write everything that's on this slide and everything that's on this PowerPoint, sorry, in the time they're given? You'll get about 11 minutes in the exam. How would you write as much as you could for all of these in that time? So I got them to plan their answer. Approximately 15 minutes, slightly longer than I said. All right, that's 1.2. Hopefully you've found this useful. Hopefully it's helped put a few more links together and a few more relationships and kind of organised it as clearly as I can try and make it for you. It's a dry one. You just have to learn it. Hopefully a lot of this is just repetitive from what you've already done previously, but it is important that you do know them and you do know the processes and the relationships. If you found this useful, give me a thumbs up. Don't forget to comment underneath any problems, issues or questions or just general points. Please feel free to drop them below. And otherwise, don't forget to subscribe as well so that you never miss out on your future criminology videos. Thanks very much, everyone. Cheers for watching. Bye for now.